When we open the scriptures, we find that salt appears again and again, never as a casual detail but always carrying a depth of meaning. The ancient world valued salt, not only as a seasoning but as a preservative, something that held back decay and kept what was precious from corruption. That is why God chose salt to symbolize covenant. In the book of Leviticus, the offerings made to the Lord were commanded to be seasoned with salt, a sign that God's promises endure and his covenant cannot spoil. When Jesus declared, "You are the salt of the earth," he was not speaking in poetry alone, he was laying a foundation of identity, telling us that our lives, if aligned with him, carry a preserving and transformative influence in a world that constantly bends toward decay. Now consider what it means to put your name in salt water. It is more than an unusual act. It is a statement, a declaration that you are consciously placing your very identity, your story, your past, your struggles, your destiny into God's purifying covenant. Salt water becomes a symbol of immersion into divine preservation. Think about how water cleanses, washes, and restores, while salt guards against corruption. Together they form a picture of what happens when a human life is entrusted fully to God. What is dirty is washed away, what is weak is preserved, and what is vulnerable is strengthened. This is not a superstition, it is a way of translating the eternal truths of the Bible into a physical gesture that reminds us of who we are and where we belong. Psychologically, symbols matter. The human mind responds deeply to images, gestures, and ritual. When you perform a symbolic act with intentional faith, it imprints truth upon your subconscious in a way that words alone cannot. We may tell ourselves repeatedly, "I am God's child, I am preserved, I am set apart." But when we take a tangible step that mirrors those words, our hearts begin to believe them with fresh conviction. Writing your name and placing it into salt water may seem simple, but in that act the heart says, "I am not my own. My life rests in God's keeping." That small physical step can shake loose doubt, fear, and the residue of old failures, replacing them with a felt assurance of divine preservation. Philosophically, salt represents permanence. It resists corruption. It does not. In the same way, the covenant of God does not erode with time, culture, or human weakness. Empires have fallen, philosophies have shifted, ideologies have risen and collapsed, but the covenant of God remains. To be the salt of the earth is to carry a permanence that outlasts the tides of history. When your name is placed in salt water, you are saying, "My life is bound to something eternal. I am not just dust passing away in the wind, I am part of a covenant that cannot spoil." This is a radical assertion of meaning in a world that often tells us life is random, fragile, and easily forgotten. There is also a moral edge to this. Salt stings when applied to a wound, but in stinging it disinfects and heals. To identify with salt is to accept that transformation is not always comfortable. God's purification is not about soothing illusions, but about burning away what does not belong. When you immerse your name in salt water, you are inviting God to sting you where you need correction, to cleanse the hidden wounds of bitterness, pride, or secret compromise. The salt reminds us that love without truth is sentimentality, but truth without love is cruelty. God gives us both love that heals and truth that purifies. On a deeper psychological level, salt speaks to the human fear of decay. Every person carries an unspoken anxiety that what they build will eventually crumble, that their efforts will be forgotten, that their identity will dissolve into nothingness. The covenant symbol of salt answers that anxiety. It says, "Your life will not be wasted, your story will not vanish into the dust, because God Himself preserves you." When Jesus said, "Have salt in yourselves," He was urging His followers to carry this confidence, that they were not like the rest of the world, adrift and fading, but anchored in permanence. To place your name in salt water is to confront that fear of decay and answer it with faith. Think of the ocean, vast and filled with salt water, a natural purifier. It is no accident that life itself began in the waters of the earth, nor that the scripture speaks of living water flowing from God's throne. Salt water carries within it the dual power to cleanse and to preserve. When you see your name soaking in it, you are seeing yourself immersed in something larger, something eternal. You are reminded that just as salt water resists corruption, so too does God resist the decay of your destiny. But let us not forget the communal side. Jesus did not call one person the salt of the earth, He called His followers collectively. To carry salt is to carry influence that blesses others, that resists the moral decay around us, that flavors life with hope and truth. When you immerse your name in salt water, you are not only preserving yourself, you are declaring that your presence in this world will preserve others. You will be the one who resists corruption in your family, your community, your work. You will be the one whose very existence adds a flavor of hope to the environment you touch. We live in an age of spiritual corrosion. Values erode, relationships collapse, truth is diluted, and faith is mocked. In such a time, the reminder that you are salt is not optional, it is essential. Without salt, food spoils quickly. Without people of covenant, society collapses into chaos. That is why the Bible presses this image into us so firmly. Because the world needs preservers. The world needs people who will hold the line against decay, who will guard what is sacred, who will keep hope alive when cynicism eats away at everything else. So when you write your name and place it in salt water, you are participating in a long biblical tradition of using physical symbols to anchor spiritual truths. You are saying, I choose to be part of God's preserving work in this world. I choose to let my life carry covenantal weight. I choose to resist the corrosion of sin and despair. This act is not magic, but it is meaningful. It is a reminder to your own soul that you are set apart for permanence, purity, and preservation. And let me leave you with this thought: salt, left unused, loses its purpose. It was never meant to sit in a jar, admired but untouched. Its value is in its application, its willingness to mingle with what needs saving. Your life is the same. It is not enough to know that you are salt. You must live as salt. You must step into environments where truth is diluted, where hope is scarce, where people are starving for meaning, and there, release the preserving, healing influence of God. When we speak about putting your name in salt water, we cannot overlook the power contained in the very idea of a name. In the biblical world, a name was never just a label. It carried the weight of identity, character, and destiny. To know a person's name was to know something essential about who they were and what they were meant to become. That is why we see God constantly intervening in Scripture by changing people's names at pivotal moments. Abram, which meant exalted father, was renamed Abraham, father of many nations. Jacob, the deceiver, was renamed Israel, the one who struggles with God and prevails. Simon, a fisherman, became Peter, the rock upon which the church would be built. Each change marked a transformation, a divine intervention that redirected the course of a person's life. Now think about what happens when you write your name on paper and place it into salt water. That act is not only symbolic, it is profoundly prophetic. You are declaring, my name, my identity, my destiny is immersed in God's covenant of preservation. Your name represents your life story, everything you have inherited, everything you have lived through, and everything you are yet to become. When that name touches salt water, you are saying that your story is no longer left to the randomness of circumstances or the weight of generational struggles. It is now preserved, purified, and directed by divine authority. Psychologically, the connection between a person and their name is deep. When someone speaks your name, you feel recognized. When your name is forgotten, you feel invisible. In many ways, our name is our anchor in the world. It represents our existence. To surrender that name to God in a symbolic act is to say, I trust you with the deepest anchor of my being. It is to let God write His purposes over your identity. And in doing so, you are aligning with a truth that is both liberating and empowering. You are known by name before heaven. Philosophically, names embody meaning. Human beings are meaning-making creatures, and one of the first acts of meaning in any life is the giving of a name. To name something is to define it, to declare its place in reality. When parents give a child a name, they are projecting hope, history, and identity into the future of that child. But we also know that names, as powerful as they are, can be distorted by pain, failure, or the words of others. Many people carry names in a deeper sense, labels like failure, unworthy, or forgotten, that were never meant for them. When you place your written name in salt water, you are in effect cleansing your identity of false labels. You are declaring, only what God has called me will remain. There is also a profound biblical assurance here. God calls His people by name. In Isaiah, God says, I have called you by your name. Oh, you are mine. In John's Gospel, Jesus speaks of Himself as the Good Shepherd, who knows His sheep by name and leads them out. To immerse your name in salt water is to remember that you are not a faceless soul in a vast universe. You are seen, known and addressed personally by God. That realization shifts the psychology of faith from something abstract to something intimate. It is no longer about believing in distant principles, but about trusting a God who knows your name. From another perspective, your name carries not only your identity, but also your destiny. Consider again the figures whose names were changed. Each new name unlocked a new future. Abraham stepped into the promise of nations. Israel stepped into the legacy of a people chosen. Peter stepped into the role of a leader who would stand as a pillar of faith. What does that tell us? It tells us that when God touches your name, He touches your destiny. And when you place your name into salt water, you are asking God to preserve, protect, and guide that destiny into its fullest expression. There is a psychological weight to this as well. Our sense of identity often dictates our behavior. A person who believes they are worthless acts as though they are. A person who believes they are chosen carries themselves different. By symbolically immersing your name into the covenant symbol of salt water, you are reprogramming your subconscious to align with God's truth rather than the lies of circumstance or past wounds. This is how transformation begins, not with empty affirmations, but with a deliberate shift in how you see your identity. Salt water here becomes a mirror of covenant. It is both cleansing and preserving. It washes away the residue of false identities and protects the true identity God has given you. When you see your name in that water, you are invited to let go of the names you have been called by others, the names you have called yourself, and to embrace the name God calls you. This is not merely spiritual poetry, it is psychological renewal. Your mind, your emotions, your very self-concept begin to align with divine truth. And let us not forget the weight of covenant identity in community. Your name is not just personal, it is relational. It connects you to family, to history, to generations. To place your name in salt water is also to intercede for that history, to ask that what has been broken in your family line be preserved and healed in you. It is a declaration that curses will not continue, that your name will not be remembered for bondage but for blessing. This act, simple as it may seem, becomes a turning point where you say, the story changes here. My name will carry a new legacy. There is also a profound philosophical truth hidden in this. To be named is to be given meaning. And to give that name to God is to return meaning to its source. In a world that often strips life of purpose and identity, this act is rebellion against meaningless. It is saying, my name has weight. My life has meaning. My destiny is not forgotten. This is not just psychology, it is theology lived out in practice. I want you to picture this clearly. Your name, written in ink, placed gently into salt water. The water slowly softens the paper, the salt preserves it from decay. And in that image, you see yourself, fragile, yes, but preserved by covenant, softened by God's Spirit, held together by His promise. That image is meant to stick with you. It is meant to remind you every time you hear your name spoken, that you are not just who the world thinks you are, not just who your failures suggest you are, but who God has declared you to be. So let me close this thought with a challenge. Do not take your name lightly. Do not treat your identity as if it were a random accident or a disposable label. Your name is the vessel of your destiny, and God Himself calls you by it. When you put your name in salt water, let it be a reminder that your life is bound to a covenant that cannot spoil, an identity that cannot be stolen, and a destiny that cannot be erased. Throughout the pages of Scripture we find a consistent pattern. God often calls His people to engage in symbolic actions that unlock spiritual realities. These actions might look simple on the surface, but behind them lies a mystery that joins faith, obedience, and divine intervention. Think of Moses stretching out his rod over the Red Sea. The rod had no power of its own, but when it was lifted in faith, the sea parted. Think of the Israelites painting their doorposts with the blood of the Lamb. To the outsider it might have looked like an odd ritual, but in that act of obedience lay the power of deliverance. Think of Naaman, a proud general, told to dip 7 times in the Jordan River to be healed of leprosy. The water of the Jordan could not cure a disease, but his willingness to humble himself and act on the prophet's word became the channel for God's healing power. Why does God use such symbolic acts? Because faith is not merely an intellectual concept. Faith must be embodied. The human heart and mind respond deeply to tangible gestures. A ritual, when performed with intention, presses truth into the subconscious and makes invisible realities visible. That is why James tells us that faith without works is dead. Faith becomes alive when it is expressed, when it is acted out in ways that align the body, the mind, and the spirit. Placing your name into salt water is one of these prophetic gestures. On the surface, it is a simple act, a name written on paper, lowered into a bowl of salt water. But spiritually it speaks volumes. It declares that you are immersing your identity, your destiny, your entire being into the covenantal power of preservation, purification, and renewal. The salt represents God's uncorrupted covenant, His promise to keep. The water represents cleansing, refreshment, and new beginning. Together they form a living picture of what it means to entrust your life to God's transforming power. Psychologically, this kind of action has a profound impact. Human beings are creatures of memory and association. When you perform a physical act tied to a spiritual truth, your mind anchors that truth more deeply. If you simply say, "I believe my life is preserved in God," your words may fade with time. But if you write your name, see it soak in the water and remember what it symbolizes, that memory imprints itself on your soul. It becomes harder to forget. You now carry a mental image of your identity being preserved in God's hands, just as the salt preserves the paper from quick decay. This strengthens your faith and gives you something to hold on to in moments of doubt. Philosophically, prophetic acts like this remind us that human beings live in both the material and the spiritual realms. We are not disembodied ideas, we are embodied souls. Therefore, God often speaks to us through acts that involve the body. When Naaman dipped in the Jordan, his body participated in his faith. When the Israelites marched around Jericho, their bodies enacted their belief in God's promise. In the same way, when you place your name in salt water, your body joins your faith. You are aligning your physical action with your spiritual conviction, and in doing so, you bridge the seen and the unseen. But what makes this truly powerful is not the water or the salt, it is the faith that accompanies it. Faith is what transforms a symbolic act into a prophetic one. Without faith, dipping in the Jordan would have been meaningless, marking a doorpost with blood would have been strange, and writing a name in salt water would have been nothing more than ritual. But with faith, these simple acts release spiritual power. They become declarations that heaven recognizes, because heaven responds to faith expressed in obedience. There is also something deeply psychological about connecting a personal name with such a symbolic act. Your name is your anchor, your sense of identity. When you see it immersed in salt water, you are reminded that your destiny is being cleansed, renewed, and preserved. The mind begins to believe what the act represents, that barriers can dissolve, curses can break, and new opportunities can emerge. In times when fear whispers that you are forgotten, this memory rises to remind you that you are known, preserved, and protected. This is not superstition. Superstition says that an object has power in itself, but faith says that God uses ordinary things to express extraordinary truth. Just as Jesus took bread and wine, ordinary elements, and gave them extraordinary meaning, so too can simple acts today carry profound significance when performed with faith. Writing a name in salt water will not change your life by itself, but doing it as a prophetic declaration that your identity belongs to God can awaken something powerful in your heart. And let us remember, breakthroughs often come when we combine faith with action. How many believers pray for change, but never take even the smallest step to embody their faith? They pray for healing, but never declare it. They pray for freedom, but never act in ways that reinforce it. They pray for preservation, but never anchor their identity in covenant. Placing your name in salt water may seem small, but it is a step, and God honors steps. It is a way of saying, I am not only praying, I am acting. I am not only believing, I am demonstrating my belief. Consider also the communal dimension. In the Bible, symbolic acts often carried weight for whole families and nations. When Abraham entered covenant with God, his descendants were blessed. When Israel marked their doors with blood, entire households were preserved. In the same way, when you place your name in salt water, you are not only acting for yourself, you are symbolically interceding for your family, your household, your community. You are asking that the preservation, purification, and renewal of God extend beyond you to all connected with your name. The philosophical depth of this act reaches even further. To immerse your name in salt water is to declare that your destiny cannot be reduced to chance. You are rejecting the worldview that says life is random, fragile, and meaningless. You are affirming that your life has purpose, that your identity is tied to eternity, and that your future is preserved by divine promise. This is a bold statement in a world that constantly tells us otherwise. It is in fact a countercultural act of faith. And here lies the beauty. What begins as a simple gesture can become a turning point in the way you see yourself and your future. Once you have performed this act with faith, you cannot see your name the same way again. You carry within you the memory of that preservation. And when challenges come, when doubt arises, when life feels unstable, you can return to that image and remind yourself, my name is in God's covenant, my life is preserved, my destiny is secured. So the call is simple yet profound. Do not let your faith remain abstract. Do not let it live only in your mind. Bring it into your actions. Embody it. Let your body join your belief. Write your name. Place it in the water. Pray over it. See it with your own eyes. And as you do, let your heart be stirred with conviction that God is not only aware of you, but actively preserving and renewing your life. Let me leave you with this reflection. Symbolic acts have power because they engage the whole person, mind, body and spirit. Placing your name in salt water is not about magic, it is about meaning. It is about saying to yourself, to God, and to the unseen world, I am preserved, I am renewed, I am marked by covenant. Do this with faith, and it will not remain just a ritual. It will become a declaration that shifts how you live, how you think, and how you carry yourself in the world.